Hello, boys and girls, and everything in between and beyond. What I thought about presenting to you today, guys, is a spectacular game that happened in the 19th century. To be more precise, in 1852 in Berlin. Now, it's not one of those games in which the guys try to figure out what to play. This is a high-level game of chess. And the first unofficial world champion is a character named Adolf Anderssen, a German mathematician in the 19th century, incredibly super strong player. So he won a couple of international tournaments, and it's absolutely spectacular. Now, he played the so-called dubbed as the Evergreen Game, a game that never gets old because it's so fresh and powerful. Every single time you look at it, you just watch it in amazement. He versed here his student, Jean Dufresne. Now, that sounds like a Frankish name. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Apologies if I didn't. So I'm going to present to you guys now this game. I think you're going to appreciate it. We really learn from it. And it's a jewel of the past. Really a jewel of the past. We must know it. Okay, so let's proceed now. E4. Of course, 19th century, there was just e4, either Danish Gambit or the King's Gambit. But now we're going to see a different Gambit today. e5, knight f3, perfect. Knight c6, and the bishop c4. Okay, so that's the classical Italian game or gioco piano. Bishop c5, perfectly. And b4. Now, boys and girls, this is called the Evans Gambit. Okay, so Evans comes from the first promoter, and the guy that firstly employed the move was a Welsh sea captain, Evans. So he firstly came up with this idea. What about the b4 pawn sacrifice? Well, briefly put, boys and girls, it's about tempting the bishop to move in on b4 so that white can play c3 and d4, challenging the pawn on e5, and in case they accept, you should be able to take back after you castle your king. So you're actually getting a stronger pawn center. So that's the, briefly, succinctly put, the idea with b4. Now, Jean Dufresne took c3, as we've discussed. Oh, before we going forwards, just briefly, apologies, guys. In case you're thinking about playing the bishop on b6, which is a possibility, you need to be aware that white will be proceeding with a4 very likely because they want to trap your bishop. So keep in mind, if you decline the pawn, okay, let me just play bishop b6 now. And now your opponent very likely will go with a4, threatening to trapping your bishop. Now, the theory recommends here, and the engine, to play as quickly as possible a6 or a5. a6, I guess, is the best thing here because, first, you save your bishop. Secondly, you keep your bishop attacking on the a7, f2 diagonal. So that's very important. Okay, there is some crazy stuff with knight b4, but you're getting worse than white if you do this with the black pieces. It just doesn't look good. I mean, a5 is going to happen. Bishop to c5. c3 going to be played. Really, I absolutely don't like it. Knight c6 here. Black pushes, takes and takes. I mean, I don't like it. It's playable, but I just don't like it very much. I just don't like it. If you want to experiment this, do it at your own risk. I totally do not recommend my friends and my students to do that. So just a slight detour from the main line that was played here, which was bishop accepts. Let me just go back, guys. b4, bishop takes. So c3, bishop to a5, push in the middle, black pawn takes. Now, obviously, the pawn on c3 is pinned. I can't take the other pawn on d4 now. But what you can do is castle the king, which they did. They've castled the king. Now you're totally free to capture if that was the case. But black chose to push on d3. Okay. Now, queen to b3 is a very typical idea because queen on b3 and the bishop on c4 form a battery to attacking f7. Okay, so the whole idea of the Evans Gambit is just to very quickly develop your pieces by giving that b4 pawn tempting the bishop to go at the margin, giving up the c5, f2 dangerous diagonal for the white king, and you try and stop the black king from castling by continually pressurizing and adding more attacking pieces. So please retain, guys, queen b3 is a very typical idea in the Evans Gambit. Queen f6 also could have been played queen to e7. So queen f6, obviously you want to protect that pawn. e5, you can't get more aggressive than that. So e5. And if some of you might be saying, well, I attack kind of like twice, right, that pawn, so it should be safe to take. Actually, it's not. It's getting even more and more worse here. So if knight were to capture, just imagine the rook to e1 attack, double attack on the pinned knight. And now, I don't know, if you continue and say, well, you know something, I think I'm going to play d6, defending the knight. Very well. But the continuation is bishop to g5. And I simply do not have good moves to recommend for black here. I just don't like it. I don't know if you like it, but I absolutely advise my younger students, don't play this with black. Not like this. It's just, you don't do that. I don't know, the queen must go to safety somewhere. And I don't know, g6, what? Knight takes, pawn takes, rook e5 check, and forking, also attacking the bishop. I know you definitely don't want to do this. You definitely don't want to do this with black. So just to keep in mind the possible traps here, okay? So it's totally worth it playing it with white from this perspective, guys. And that's Adolf Anderssen in 1852 playing the spectacular lines. Fantastic. The first unofficial world champion. Okay, so next one here was rook to e1, which was played anyway. You want to get the rook on the semi-open file. Knight to e7. Bishop to e3. Another typical idea. Bishop to a3. So remember, queen on b3, forming a battery. Bishop to a3, attacking the knight on e7. And implicitly some possible pin if they castle on the king side. If you ask me, was it worth it to give that pawn for white on b4? I would say yes, it's totally worth it. b5 now, attacking the bishop. Now, that's a bit of a blunder. And the engine signals, look, this is already a blunder here. Although the idea is generous for black. Well, the black plans here to play rook on b8. And, you know, gaining the b column and attacking the queen, which can very nicely go to safety on a4. So it didn't really pay off. So I wouldn't recommend that. Bishop b6, knight on d2, more pieces, more fuel to the fire of attacking. And now in this very position here, black should have castled. They haven't. So they should have castled here, and the game would have continued being balanced and equal. So they haven't castled. You know, I mean, probably they really wanted to play very aggressively. But if the king is on E column, not being castled, and if the white bishops are menacing and plaguing and totally cruising, you know, half the board here, you should castle. So they haven't. They play bishop to b7. Now, knight jumps on e4. Queen to f5, it's not very clear what exactly they had in mind with this move, because it's a blunder only because bishop d3 followed. And practically, if black doesn't play carefully now, it is the disaster with the knight onto d6 or f6. And I'm afraid the queen is gone. So that was a complete loss of a tempo and endangering the queen even more. Completely unnecessary take from black's perspective. So queen plays on h5. They did sacrifice the knight on f6. I mean, the way Anderssen played this in the 19th century, really, it's all the proof you need. The guy was incredibly creative, very innovative, and highly aggressive, exactly how we should be playing chess. So now the knight is being pinned. Now, when white did the trade on f6, that indeed opened the column for the black rook. So the black rook now attacks on g2, as you can see. And there is also the threat that queen might be taken on f3. So that's also another idea. What does Adolf Anderssen played? rook to d1, getting all of his pieces. All of white's pieces are attacking. All of them. Okay, that's fabulous. The problem is for black, they haven't castled their king. So at some point, a couple of moves ago, they chose to play bishop on b7, which in itself is not a bad idea. I mean, bishop and the rook, I mean, you know, fabulous. But they should have taken a bit care of the king's safety. Never neglect the king's safety. And you see, white castled the king quite quickly. Black hasn't. Not at all. So that is very costly for them now. Now, this is the move that actually announces the end. And here it comes the brilliancy. White's going to play a brilliant move and then a couple of 3-4 great moves, one after another. Totally spectacular. Now, the engine recommends here, as soon as possible, as a critical moment, emergency move, queen to h3, which would be threatening a checkmate. But instead, he played queen takes on f3, which is a huge difference. Given by d, I hope you guys ready now. Don't be too upset if you don't guess the next move. It's absolutely brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. Boom, we're starting. Rook takes knight with check. Okay, so now the king is in check. Dufresne took with the knight, hoping now that maybe the bishop opens up and the rook, and he'll be able to actually checkmate the white king. What does Adolf Anderssen play next? Well, not just the rook sacrifice. Now here comes another bomb. Boom, queen takes on d7. I mean, you just can't not take. You cannot not take the queen. It's just insane. King takes. And now you got a chance to play a double check. Discovered attack completely can't be refused. He made an offer. They couldn't refuse. Check. Boom. Double check now. Bishop checks the king. And the rook on d1 checks the king. There's just nothing you can do. You got to move the king away. But it's too late now for Jean Dufresne. King goes on f8. And probably now it's becoming more visible, guys. Bishop to d7 checks. King retreats on f8. Already too late. Checkmate on the next turn. If white were to take with the pawn, white would have lost because the king runs away on g7, escapes. But the bishop takes on e7, delivering the lethal blow at the very end. Checkmate. A spectacular game. Absolutely intense. Absolutely intense. So, yes, Adolf Anderssen, the unofficial world champion in the 19th century, the strongest in that era. I think he lost to Paul Morphy, American genius, and I think he lost to William Steinitz, if I'm correct. But nevertheless, you could see the quality of their games. Fabulous game. The Evans Gambit, which I invite you guys to explore a bit more. So that was it. The Evergreen Game, 1852, Berlin. It will never get old, and it will stay with us forever, which is great. Chess for eternity. Thank you very much, guys, for being with me, and I'll see you shortly.